Hi everybody, this is Linda Pratt and I am here today with another episode of Ask, where Holyoke residents ask department heads and members of boards and commissions about the work they do and why we should care about it. Today I am talking with Lyn Horan. Lyn is the Vice Chair of the Commission on Disabilities. Thanks for being with us, Lyn.
I'm glad to be here.
Lyn is a fairly new member of the Commission, but she is not new to the world of disabilities and the issues that affect people with disabilities. So, Lyn, I want to ask you a few basic questions, and then I want to give you time to just talk about matters that you think are really important.
Sounds great.
Okay. First of all, when I think of the Commission on Disabilities, really the only thing I know about it is that you deal with handicap parking. And I promise we will talk about handicap parking, but we're going to do it at the end. There are a couple other things I want to ask you, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. I have come to learn recently that all of the boards and commissions have somebody in the city that is responsible for working with them. So can you tell us who that is for the Commission on Disabilities?
In Holyoke, it is Lyn Horan, who is in the Department of Personnel for the city. And it is very typical to have a city official with all these commissions because that's kind of the oversight that's necessary within a municipality. Typically, it's usually the city planners for disability for somewhat obvious reasons, because a lot of the issues disabled face are traffic, sidewalks, accessibility to buildings, and these are the things that city planners deal with, but we can deal with them as well, even in this capacity.
Okay. So if someone has a question or wants to get in touch with the commission, they would contact Lyn Horan at the office of the personnel office?
I think that's part of it, but generally I think in Holyoke Commission on Disability, we go to the chair first, and you can actually go to the website for the city and look under commissions, and you will see the Commission on Disability, and on that you'll have the information there for both Kelly and her email contact, as well as our chair, Leanna.
Okay, thank you. So I am just going to turn this over to you. I know you have a lot of things that you would like people to know about that the Commission is doing or could be doing to help residents in the city of Holyoke. So it's all yours.
Great, I appreciate that. I would have to say this commission, because it deals with actually globally the largest marginalized population in the world, and the most diverse as well, and not just diverse in disability, but in terms of race, gender, age, all sorts of things. So it is a really wonderful, in many ways, cross-section of our population as well. And in fact, in Massachusetts, or in the United States, I should start with, 1 in 4 people are disabled. 1 in 4. We're not a small population. In Massachusetts, I believe we're up to 11.5% of Massachusetts population. In Hampden County, we are actually the county with the highest percentage of disabled people, and that 16.3% of Hampden County is disabled. So I always bring that up because, again, sometimes because we don't see disabled people, we really have no idea how many exist. And so a commission that represents them, and one that's vocal and allows disabled people to also be vocal, is really significant, because what we run in many times, like a lot of marginalized groups, it's really a lack of understanding. If you haven't experienced it, either with a loved one or in your own life, you might say, well, I don't see anybody in wheelchairs. And I've had that happen with a lot of folks that do really meaningful things, like our Holyoke Emergency Shelter. Say that, gee, we don't have an elevator that's functioning. Not their fault, by the way. It is an expense. But the fact is, he did not know, the gentleman I talked to, that there were people in his community that are not only homeless, but disabled. In fact, again, another population that's more likely to be disabled. But if you don't see them, and we don't come because we can't get in the buildings. So that's a lot of why it's really important to have representatives in our government to help them out, from the small things to the much larger things.
And Lynn, it's true, isn't it, that not all disabilities are visible? So people may have disabilities that affect their ability to participate in society, but they're not necessarily visible disabilities.
Absolutely, and that's an excellent point, because there are so-called anatomical physical disabilities, diseases like fibromyalgia, lupus, even MS, which is what I have, can in some part of the MS population not be necessarily visible. And a lot of these diseases, by the way, they will also start early in age. So it's not just those of us like myself that are in their 60s. I started with the MS when I was 27. Typically, a lot of autoimmune disabling diseases, lupus, RA, even diabetes can start in your late 20s or your early 30s, which is the height of the time when your life is really beginning. You're starting a profession, but you haven't had time to accrue savings for like healthcare. You're raising children. So it's a really important thing. The other so-called invisible disability we don't always think about, and is calculated in these figures, these statistics, are mental health issues, cognitive issues, neurodiversity as well, like autism, things like that, that are also thought of as invisible, and certainly not invisible in their impact.
So I know you've had a long history of working on issues that affect people with disabilities. What are some things that you really want to bring to the Disabilities Commission, you and the other members here in Holyoke?
Well, a lot, I think. And I want to commend first, because I'm new there, there are 2 to 3 members we have now that have been doing this for a couple decades. And by the way, we're all volunteers. Everything we do, both in our meetings and behind the scenes, is volunteer. And they've done plenty. But I think, like all things, we're coming to a different time period where the issues are not only becoming more prolific. One thing, for instance, COVID. We're going to, and unfortunately for the maybe younger population that is healthy, is that we baby boomers are now going to be the biggest aging population we've ever had. So that means more disability. There are after effects with COVID we're discovering as well, also creating a larger population. So they've done a fine job, but I think now they and myself and some of our new members, including a person that we have who is the mother of a child with cerebral palsy, which is also, by the way, important in membership for these groups because families are affected too. And another member as well, Jessica Lebron Martinez, who is disabled herself, grew up like that. She brings something to the table, but we all are in agreement that it's probably time, first of all, to do a survey and reassess Holyoke, because data really helps. It helps in funding for your needs. It helps in addressing what are the contemporary problems. So we're hoping to bring in and start a survey, go into all of our wards, because that's another important part. That disability is not a lot of fun for me. I certainly know what it's like to lose my income, to lose and not be able to have enough income to have decent health care. But I'm at a point where I have pretty good health care, but a lot of folks don't. And so we want to make sure we go into all socioeconomic brackets and wards of our city to see what they are individually dealing with. The other thing is the federal government, as most of us know, just put out a huge infrastructure bill that has created a lot of funds to be distributed to individual states and cities. And in that, there are programs and dictates. One is called Safe Streets. I believe that is about $11 billion going out to, so we all need to be in there, and somebody needs to be steering our city officials who may not be aware of this need to start creating curb cuts, sidewalks, crosswalks that are placed strategically near municipal transit, for instance, because a lot of people don't have cars or can't afford cars, and that includes disabled people. And so all the more reason to make sure we have those safe streets and sidewalks, and that certainly would benefit not only disabled people, but moms with strollers, people carrying groceries. You know, you just go on down the line. Often when we think about universal design, which includes ADA and disabled safety characteristics like that, you're also benefiting the whole population.
So, Lyn, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it around in Holyoke, because you've spent a lot of time here and I'm sure you're really familiar with the obstacles that you've encountered over the years, what do you see as the critical issues that you would really like to see change?
Well, that's a good question.
And I didn't prepare you for that one, did I?
No, but I love that. So I'm going to try to pretend to use my own magic wand here. And it really feels like that when we're up against what we are. But there actually is, you know, economic and logical reasons to actually start thinking. So the first thing I think is education and information. And I'm hoping to work with more of our public officials, like I'm hoping to work with our city planner and our city engineer. I've had a couple discussions with our mayor. And theoretically, or maybe not so theoretically, what I would really like to do is put them in a wheelchair for a week and watch them go through their daily lives, which are plenty busy as they are, no doubt, and see what it's like to face the obstacles that the rest of us deal with, trying to raise our families, trying to take our kids to school, trying to go to our jobs, take care of our health, recreation, you know, all of those things. So a little education, I think, will go a long way. In all fairness to the people that don't understand, it is a lack of experience. So that's what I do first in that magic wand, is to kind of open up minds and empathy, firsthand experience. And then I think that will go a long way. In specifics, I would say definitely accessibility and access, just in every way that we are disabled, to start doing that. But again, I come back to that empathy, because without that, you do not know this is part of what we live with. And the best way I can sum that up is, there's an old feminist adage, actually, and it really speaks to any group that's marginalized and why discrimination is so destructive for our entire society. It's not about what we don't get. It's about what we don't get to give. And so when we can't participate in society, it doesn't just hurt us, it hurts everyone. And, you know, when we can give, then we can patronize businesses, we pay our taxes, we can work, we can share the gifts and the individual attributes we have with making our communities better.
That's a great perspective, because I think sometimes we look at people with disabilities and we think they need help. We sometimes feel sorry for what they're going through, but we don't always look at them as people who have just as much to give as everyone else.
Absolutely.
Are there particular obstacles that you've encountered just in your daily life going around Holyoke that you'd like people to know about?
Unfortunately, yes. And I would say it is interesting. And in fact, that is, well, I'll say first, there absolutely are. Every time someone like me goes out, but definitely here in Holyoke, like everywhere else, is that we have to find out, can we get there? We get invited to places, my husband and I, we have to get groceries. My husband had to go to the police station. I had to drop off some papers for him. Talk about empathy. He recently tore his Achilles tendon. A very able-bodied athletic man had his first experience of what it was like to be like his wife. And I became the instant chauffeur. So I dropped off the papers there. And it's a relatively new law, so shouldn't have been grandfathered in. Very heavy double doors at the entrance, nice and wide, but it was almost impossible for me, with low upper body strength, to open those doors. Also a problem was the only handicap spot was on the street, and it was taken. I had looked ahead, so this is what the kind of things we have to do. We have to look up on maps, we have to make phone calls. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of the spontaneity out of everything. Parked across the street in the park there, and knew that there were handicap spots there. But because there's not a curb cut at the crosswalk from the park to the police station, I had to go out onto the street at this level high on a busy main street of Holyoke to get across the street to go into those front doors. And so that's a really dangerous thing, to put people that are disabled out in the middle of a busy street. And this is our public safety building. And so so
Yeah.
you see the irony and the kind of things that would happen.
While I was waiting for you here today, we're at the Holyoke Media Studios, I noticed that there is a handicap parking right outside the door, but there's no curb cut there.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, Lynn could park there because you have a van and it's wheelchair accessible, but you wouldn't have been able to get up the curb and into the building.
Exactly.
And you also asked me when we were setting up this interview, is the building accessible? And I knew it was a new building, so I was pretty sure it was, but I really hadn't paid attention. I didn't notice, was there a step up, because I can walk up the steps.
Right.
And I think that's what you are referring to when you talk about just awareness and helping people
Absolutely.
understand what those little obstacles are that are little to us but are huge to someone who isn't able to get
No
up and
doubt.
down them.
It really is. And a good example of that, too, that relates back to our economy and business, which we want to bring into Holyoke, is that, again, look at that percentage for Hampden County of disabled people. If you put those folks to work, if the only thing that was keeping them from working was the inaccess to all these buildings, how good would that be?
Great
So,
point.
private company contacted me. A friend of mine works for Fuss & O'Neill, which is a regional engineering firm with offices in Holyoke. When they saw me put out one of my educational Facebook posts called Wheelchair 101, she contacted me because they've already started the process in this private engineering firm to really be more universal design conscientious. And the basis of universal design, as I said, is not just ADA compliance or disability issues, but thinking about entire communities and who's in them, whoever they are, and how you can build buildings that allow them to be comfortable in their own communities and interact safely with each other. And they asked me to be on their panel. It was one of the most refreshing experiences I ever had, because I didn't have to go in there and convince them why it was a good idea to
Right.
consider their disabled folks. And they are incorporating it in design already, whether it's recreational things, whether it's transportation, and they're really excited about it. So.
Great. You probably are aware of this, but we will be having a new park in Holyoke that has been partially funded by the Community Preservation Act, and it is an accessible park. I believe it's in the Highlands. So again, that's, it would be,
That's huge.
it could be used by anyone, any child,
Yeah.
but it is accessible to children with disabilities. So I think that's a great example of what you're talking about.
Is. And so if children, and I love that, in fact, one of the people at Fuss and O'Neill has designed recreational outdoor parks like that for children. The other wonderful bonus of that is children are born pretty open-minded. You know, they're out there playing together and they're not really too concerned about what race you are, or it's more like, do you like chocolate ice cream or not? It is we adults who start constructing those false notions of who's different, who's better.
And
so
who's worthy.
Exactly value. And they're trying to find their own value. So when you provide a park like you're talking about, what's really wonderful, and if those kids are integrated with kids of other diversities like disability, then it becomes a part of their norm. And instead of teaching them those destructive false constructs, we're teaching them from day one something very different, and they're much likely to be more likely to be the sort of objective, wonderful, open-minded person that's going to be a great part of their community as adults.
Well, I really thank you for being with us today, and I promised I would ask about handicap parking because I know that is something that people have heard of. So if someone is interested in a handicap parking spot, what's the first step they should take?
So I would say the best step first would be to contact our Commission on Disability chair, who is Leanna Pasialis. And again, if you go to the city, holyokecity.org, if you go to the city website and look under the departments of commissions, you will find the Commission on Disability, and they will have that listed, or you can write it down now when you listen to this. And her email is lpasialis@gmail.com. That's lpasialis@gmail.com. And again, her name is Leanna Pasalius, and she is our chair for our commission.
All right. Thanks so much, Lynn, and I really appreciate you talking with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
It's wonderful.
Have a great rest of this day.
You too.